It was a typical afternoon in the city, the air thick with humidity and the distant hum of traffic. But for Tyrese, a 15-year-old boy with a wiry frame and eyes that had seen more than most kids his age, today was far from ordinary. He walked the streets of his neighborhood like he always did, keeping his head low, hoping to stay out of trouble. But trouble had a way of finding him, even on days like this, when the sun beat down relentlessly and the world seemed to move in slow motion. The sound of footsteps behind him snapped him from his thoughts. He didn't have to turn around to know it was the police. The way the shoes hit the pavement, the steady rhythm, it was too familiar. Tyrese's heart quickened. The officer's voice boomed behind him. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" He froze. A chill ran down his spine. He'd been stopped before, but something about this moment felt different. The cop was bigger than most, taller, bulkier, with a hard face and eyes that had seen too much. His badge gleamed under the sun, a symbol of power he wielded without hesitation. Tyrese could feel the weight of the officer's gaze, the sharpness in the air, as if the man were assessing him, sizing him up like an animal in a cage. "Let's see your ID, kid." Tyrese swallowed. He was used to this, used to the way they would ask, demand, threaten, always with an edge of something darker behind their words. But today was different. The officer's hand hovered near his belt, fingers twitching like they were waiting for something. "What's that?" The officer pointed at Tyrese's wrist. His eyes narrowed as they locked on the medical bracelet Tyrese wore, a small piece of plastic that had been his lifeline for years. It told the world that he had a condition, something that could cause his body to fail at any moment. It was his only protection, his only safety net. But to this officer, it was just another thing to mock. "What's this? Some kind of tag? You think you're special or something?" The officer grabbed Tyrese's wrist with a force that made him wince. Tyrese pulled back, his pulse racing, but the officer wasn't having any of it. He yanked the bracelet off with a sickening crack, the plastic snapping in his hands. Tyrese's breath caught in his throat. "Give that back!" Tyrese's voice cracked, his heart pounding harder now. "Don't make me tell you again," the officer growled, looking down at the shattered bracelet in his hand like it was nothing more than a cheap piece of trash. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and Tyrese stood there, frozen, feeling a cold wave of panic wash over him. This wasn't just some random abuse of power. This was something far more dangerous. The officer was testing him, trying to break him, to make him submit. But Tyrese wasn't going to give in. He wasn't. He was about to say something sharp, something that would make the officer regret every second of this. But then he felt a presence, a shadow looming behind him. He didn't have to turn around to know who it was. No, he didn't see the tall figure approach, but he felt it, like the weight of a storm gathering in the distance. And that's when everything changed. "That's enough." The voice, smooth and commanding, cut through the tension like a blade. Tyrese's heart skipped a beat. The officer froze, his grip still on Tyrese's wrist. But now, there was something else. Fear? No, not fear. It was recognition. The cop's eyes darted to the figure standing just behind Tyrese. The man was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his expression hard as stone, his eyes like cold, sharp knives. The officer knew him. Tyrese didn't understand at first. Who was this man? But the officer knew, and suddenly his confidence started to crumble. The officer dropped Tyrese's wrist, the bracelet still dangling in his hand. It was as if the cop had just realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff, and one wrong move would send him plummeting into a world of consequences he couldn't escape. "Governor Montgomery," the officer muttered, his voice thick with hesitation. The name hit Tyrese like a punch to the gut. Governor Montgomery, his godfather. The man who had promised to protect him, who had always looked out for him, was standing right there. And now the officer knew. Everything about this situation shifted in an instant. The world Tyrese had lived in, where he was just another black kid in a rough neighborhood, seemed to collapse. It wasn't just about him anymore. This was about power. This was about a game far bigger than he could ever imagine. And the game was just beginning. The officer took a step back, his hand still clutching the shattered medical bracelet. But his posture had changed. The arrogance that had once defined him now seemed to falter, replaced by a cold, silent acknowledgement of the danger looming over him. Tyrese could feel the shift in the air, the tension wrapping itself tighter around him with every passing second. His godfather, Governor Montgomery, stood like a towering figure, the weight of his presence enough to make the officer hesitate. But Tyrese wasn't looking at the officer anymore. His eyes were locked on the man in the suit, the man who had always been there for him, who had told him countless times that nothing would ever hurt him as long as he had family. But now, everything felt different. The man who had promised safety was standing in the middle of a street, his eyes cold and calculating. Tyrese had always known his godfather was a powerful man, a force in the city, but seeing him now, so detached, so measured, was like seeing a different side of the world, a side he had never wanted to understand. The officer, still visibly shaken, wiped his brow, clearly struggling to regain some semblance of control. I didn't know, sir. I didn't realize. It won't happen again. I swear," he stammered, his voice thick with a mixture of fear and embarrassment. But Governor Montgomery didn't flinch. His gaze remained fixed on the officer, unwavering, cold as ice. "You'll do well to remember who you're dealing with next time," Montgomery said, his voice smooth, but carrying an undeniable weight. Tyrese stood there, his heart still racing, trying to make sense of the scene unfolding before him. He had always admired his godfather, had always believed in the power of his name. But as he watched the officer shrink under Montgomery's gaze, a part of him felt sickened. There was no kindness in this moment. There was no compassion. It was just power. And Tyrese knew, deep down, that this was the world he was born into, a world where power meant everything, where everything could be controlled with a look, with a single word. The officer's face twisted with humiliation, but it wasn't the kind of humiliation that comes from a simple mistake. No, this was deeper. This was the kind of humiliation that crushed a person's spirit, left them broken. He had crossed a line he didn't even know existed. And the governor, with all his influence, was making sure he knew it. "Get out of here," Montgomery finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, but the command was clear. The officer didn't wait for another word. He dropped the broken bracelet at Tyrese's feet and turned, his head down, his steps quick and unsteady. As the officer retreated, Tyrese couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The weight of the encounter hung in the air, thick and oppressive. The governor stood tall, his back straight, his face unreadable. He was a man used to controlling every situation, to making the world bend to his will. But for some reason, in that moment, Tyrese couldn't help but feel small. He had seen the worst of the system, the racism, the injustice. But this was a different kind of monster. The world of the powerful and the world of the oppressed, colliding in a single brutal moment. Montgomery's cold eyes turned to Tyrese, his face softening ever so slightly. "You okay, kid?" he asked, though there was no real warmth in the words. It was more of a formality, a distant concern. Tyrese nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, I'm fine," he whispered, but the words didn't feel right. He wasn't fine, not at all. For a brief second, Montgomery's gaze flickered to the shattered bracelet on the ground. It lay there like a broken promise, a reminder of just how easily people could be discarded, their lives reduced to nothing more than a single meaningless piece of plastic. He didn't say anything about it, but Tyrese could tell the weight of that bracelet, the weight of what had just happened, wasn't lost on him. But what truly stung, what truly shook Tyrese to his core, was the realization that his godfather wasn't just a protector. He wasn't just someone who cared. He was a man of the system, a man who had mastered the art of manipulation, of control. He had played the game long enough to know that sometimes people needed to be broken in order to maintain order. Sometimes, in order to survive, you had to step on others, make them smaller, weaker. Tyrese had always known there was power in his godfather's name. But now, he understood that power came at a cost. "You'll be fine," Montgomery said, his voice steady, but the coldness never left. "People like him need to know their place, and they'll learn it. Eventually." The words cut through Tyrese like a blade. He had no doubt that Montgomery was right. People like the officer, people who thought they had control, would be broken in time. But the question lingered in the back of Tyrese's mind. Was that the world he wanted to live in? A world where power was the only thing that mattered, where people were crushed underfoot and left to die, forgotten. A world where even the people you trusted could be just as ruthless as the ones you feared. The answer to that question was becoming clearer with every passing second. And in that moment, Tyrese knew. He wasn't just part of the system anymore. He was part of something much darker, something much more dangerous, and there was no turning back now. Tyrese sat in the back of the car, staring out the window as the city blurred by. The air in the car felt stifling, oppressive, the weight of everything that had happened hanging heavy in the silence. His mind kept replaying the moment when the officer had torn off his medical bracelet. The sting of humiliation still fresh, but it wasn't just the officer's actions that haunted him. It was his Godfather's cold, calculated detachment. Tyrese had always looked up to Governor Montgomery, admired him for his power, for his ability to command respect without saying a word. But today, something inside him had shifted. The mask had slipped, revealing the ruthlessness that lay beneath. The car rolled to a stop in front of a tall, imposing building. Tyrese's eyes flickered toward it, a sense of unease gnawing at him. This wasn't his neighborhood, not even close. The polished glass windows reflected the sunlight, casting an almost surreal glow on the streets below. Everything here was designed to make you feel small. It was a world where money and influence reigned, a world that had never cared about people like him, people who were just trying to survive. The door clicked open, and Montgomery motioned for Tyrese to follow. The governor's face remained expressionless as he led the way through the sleek marble lobby. Tyrese felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine. He'd never been inside a place like this before. It was too clean, too perfect, like a world that didn't belong to people like him. They passed a few guards who gave them curt nods, but no one looked at Tyrese. No one even acknowledged his existence. To them, he was invisible, a ghost. They reached the elevator, and as the doors slid open, Montgomery stepped inside, his eyes locked on Tyrese with a cold intensity. Tyrese hesitated for a moment before following him in. The elevator was silent except for the soft hum of the machinery as it ascended, and Tyrese could feel his anxiety building. His palms were sweating, his chest tightening with each floor they passed. The world outside the elevator seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them in this sterile, suffocating space. The governor finally spoke, his voice low and controlled. "You've seen what happens when people step out of line, Tyrese. You've seen how quickly they're reminded of their place." Tyrese swallowed hard, trying to process the words. He nodded, though the bitter taste of those words lingered in his mouth. "You have to understand, boy," Montgomery continued, the nickname slipping off his tongue like a command, "that the world doesn't care about you. It never has. People like us, we're not allowed to show weakness, not allowed to be anything less than what we are. Power, Tyrese, that's all that matters. The moment you show them you're weak, they'll tear you apart. That officer? He needed to be reminded of that. And if he didn't learn today, I'd make sure he learned tomorrow." Tyrese's mind raced. Power. That was all this world was about. It wasn't about kindness or fairness, or even right and wrong. It was about who had the strength to dominate. He had seen it in the way the officer had treated him. He had seen it in the cold indifference of his Godfather's eyes. The world didn't care about him. It only cared about what he could do, how much he could be used, how much power he could yield. The elevator came to a halt, and the doors slid open with a soft ding. They walked down a long corridor, the click of Montgomery's shoes echoing off the walls. The air felt thick, as if it too was suffocating under the weight of everything that had happened. They entered a large, immaculate office with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. It was a room designed for one thing, to make anyone who entered it feel small, insignificant. The governor walked behind a large desk, his fingers brushing across the polished surface as he turned to face Tyrese. "You need to understand this world, Tyrese. The streets, the cops, the government, they're all just pieces in a game. And you're a player now. whether you like it or not. Tyrese's stomach churned. He felt like a pawn in a game he hadn't agreed to play. A pawn that had been thrown into the fire without warning, without preparation. He didn't want this life. He didn't want to be a part of this world where everything was about who could crush the other first, who could keep their boot on someone's neck the longest. He was just a kid. But that was the truth of it, wasn't it? He had been born into this. This was his world now. The officer, the governor, they had all shown him that there was no escaping it. You either rose to the top or you were crushed beneath it. Tyrese took a step back, trying to make sense of everything. So, what now? He asked, his voice shaky. What happens next? Montgomery's eyes narrowed. He wasn't the warm, caring Godfather Tyrese had always known. No, this man in front of him was a machine. A cold force of nature that had learned how to survive in a world where nothing came without a price. Now, Montgomery said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. Now you learn. You learn how to survive. You learn how to manipulate the system. You learn how to make them fear you. Because in this world, if you're not feared, you're nothing. Tyrese felt a sickening knot in his stomach as Montgomery's words sank in. Fear. That's what the world was built on. Fear and control. It didn't matter who you were, what you believed, or what was right. What mattered was who could strike first, who could make the other bow down. And he was about to learn how to do just that. As Montgomery turned his back and walked toward a bookshelf, Tyrese stood still, lost in the gravity of what he had just been told. The door to this world had opened, and there was no closing it. Tyrese knew deep down that the man he had once trusted, his godfather, was the key to his survival now. But in order to survive, he would have to become something he never wanted to be, something far darker than he had ever imagined. He wasn't just a player in this game. He was about to become its most dangerous piece. Let's take a brief pause here. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening to our stories from? Have you ever experienced anything similar in your life? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss out on any upcoming chapters. Now, let's continue. The days after the meeting in the governor's office blurred together for Tyrese, each one feeling heavier than the last. He was caught in a whirlwind of unfamiliar emotions, his mind spinning as the world around him seemed to shift and change. He had always known the streets weren't kind, but this was something else entirely. The world he had stepped into wasn't just brutal. It was a machine, a cold, indifferent beast that consumed everything in its path. And now, Tyrese was part of it. It wasn't just the power plays his godfather had shown him. It was the way people treated him. Every look, every whisper, every time he walked through the streets, he could feel their eyes on him, judging, measuring, calculating. And it wasn't just the people on the streets. It was the officers too. The ones who looked at him with contempt when they thought no one was watching. They all knew who he was now. They knew who his godfather was. And that made them look at him differently. It made them look at him like something to be broken, a tool to be used. One night, just a few days after the meeting with Montgomery, Tyrese found himself walking home alone. The air was thick with humidity, and the streets were quiet. Too quiet. His heart raced as his feet tapped against the pavement, the echo of his steps sounding too loud in the silence. As he passed a dark alleyway, he heard a voice. "Hey, you!" Tyrese froze. His blood ran cold. He knew that voice. He turned slowly, his body stiff with anxiety. Two officers were standing at the mouth of the alley, their uniforms crisp and sharp in the low light, their faces hard with disdain. Tyrese had seen them before, seen the way they looked at him when they thought he wasn't looking. But tonight was different. Tonight, they were waiting for him. "Got a minute?" one of the officers asked, his tone mocking, his eyes scanning Tyrese like he was prey. Tyrese's pulse quickened. He could feel the tension in the air, like a storm was brewing, ready to explode. "I'm just heading home," he said, his voice steady, though his stomach churned with unease. The officer laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent a shiver down Tyrese's spine. "Home? Yeah, sure you are. But we've got some questions, kid. Questions about your godfather." The officer's words dripped with venom, and Tyrese's blood ran cold. He knew exactly what they meant. They were testing him. The officers had already made up their minds about him. To them, he wasn't just a kid. He was a threat, a symbol of something they hated, something they couldn't control. And now, they were going to make sure he knew his place. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about," Tyrese said, trying to keep his voice calm, trying to back away. But the officers stepped forward, blocking his path. "Oh, you don't, huh?" The second officer sneered, taking a step closer. "Well, maybe we should teach you a lesson. Make sure you remember who you belong to." His words were laced with venom, a dangerous promise hanging in the air between them. Tyrese's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to fight back, to scream, but something in the way they looked at him, like he was nothing more than an animal, made him hesitate. It was a look he'd seen before, the same look the officer had given him when he ripped off his medical bracelet. The same look that had come from his godfather, when he had shown Tyrese that power was the only thing that mattered. The officer reached out, grabbing Tyrese's arm with a grip that made his bones ache. "You think because of who you're tied to, you're untouchable. You think we won't put you in your place? You're just another worthless kid to us. And if we want to make you hurt, we can. We can make your life hell." Tyrese could feel the weight of the officer's words sinking in, like a heavy stone pressing against his chest. He had never felt so small, so helpless. His knees wobbled, and for a second, he thought he might collapse under the pressure. This wasn't just about the officer's racism. It was about power, about control. Tyrese was nothing more than a tool for them to break, to bend to their will. "You're nothing," the officer whispered harshly in his ear, his hot breath making Tyrese's skin crawl. "You're just another black kid, and we own you." Tyrese's heart hammered in his chest. The words hit him like a punch to the gut, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. But then something inside him snapped. He remembered his godfather's cold words. "If you're not feared, you're nothing." In that moment, Tyrese realized something. These officers were no different from the system that had shaped them. They were just pieces in a game, one where power and fear ruled everything. They didn't see him as a person. They saw him as something to be controlled, to be broken. And for the first time, Tyrese understood the weight of what he had to do to survive. He couldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. He had learned enough to know that the only way to survive in this world was to show them that he wouldn't break. With a surge of anger, Tyrese yanked his arm free from the officer's grip, shoving him back with all the strength he could muster. The officer stumbled, taken aback by the force, but Tyrese didn't stop there. He stepped back, his fists clenched, his jaw tight with determination. "You don't own me," Tyrese said, his voice sharp, his eyes locking with the officer's. "You don't get to break me. Not today. Not ever." The officer sneered, wiping the smirk off his face. "We'll see about that," he spat. But there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. For a moment, just a moment, he seemed to realize that Tyrese wasn't the weak, scared kid he had expected. Tyrese didn't wait for the officer to make another move. He turned and ran, his legs carrying him faster than he thought possible, his heart pounding in his chest. The officers didn't follow. Not yet, at least. But Tyrese knew this wasn't over. It would never be over. He had learned the first lesson of this world. Fear was a weapon, and if you couldn't use it, you would be crushed by it. But now, Tyrese had something else. A fire inside him that wouldn't be extinguished. He wasn't going to let them win. Not today. Not ever. The days following Tyrese's encounter with the officers felt like a blur. His heart raced every time he stepped outside, the fear of what might happen next always lingering in the back of his mind. But that encounter had awakened something inside him. Something raw. Something dangerous. He couldn't just sit back and wait for the world to crush him. He had to fight, even if he didn't know how. Even if he didn't know if he was strong enough to survive it. The next few days were quiet. Almost too quiet. The officers hadn't made another move, and the whispers around the neighborhood died down as quickly as they'd started. But Tyrese knew better. He knew this wasn't over. It wasn't going to be over until someone was forced to acknowledge their place in the system, until someone was broken beyond repair. And he wasn't about to be that someone. It was late one evening when Tyrese found himself walking home again, his thoughts consumed by the weight of what was coming. He had learned to trust no one, not even the people who claimed to care for him. His godfather, Governor Montgomery, had shown him the truth. Power was the only thing that mattered in this world, and if you didn't have it, you were nothing. He'd heard the way Montgomery spoke, the coldness in his words, the way he dismissed people like they were disposable, like they were nothing more than pawns in a game. Tyrese hated the feeling that his godfather had planted inside him. He hated the way it made him look at the world, but he couldn't ignore it. He couldn't pretend he hadn't seen what he had seen. And the thing that hurt the most was the realization that he was part of it, a cog in a machine that crushed people without a second thought. Tonight, as Tyrese walked down the dimly lit street, he was acutely aware of every step, every shadow that passed by. He felt the eyes of the world on him, the weight of their judgment heavy on his shoulders. He could hear the murmurs as he walked by, the looks that said everything without uttering a single word. They knew who he was. They knew who his godfather was, and that made him a target. But this time, Tyrese wasn't alone. As he turned the corner, he spotted a figure standing by the alleyway, an officer, his face half hidden by the shadows. Tyrese's blood ran cold. This wasn't just any officer. This was the one who had mocked him the day his bracelet was ripped from his wrist, the one who had whispered those hateful words. The officer's cold eyes locked onto Tyrese's as he stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate. "You think you're tough now, huh?" The officer sneered, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable edge. "You think because your godfather runs this city, that you're untouchable?" Tyrese didn't respond. He stood his ground, his fists clenching at his sides, his mind racing. He could feel the heat of the officer's gaze on him, could hear the words dripping from his lips, meant to tear him down, to remind him of his place. "You're just another kid, boy," the officer continued, stepping closer. "A worthless, good-for-nothing kid. You think you can walk these streets and be something? You think you can take on people like me?" Tyrese's breath quickened. The officer was inches away now, his breath rancid with the smell of stale cigarettes. Tyrese could feel his anger rising, his body trembling with the urge to fight back. But something in his chest tightened. He couldn't let this man see him break. He couldn't let him see that the words were getting to him, that the hate was sinking in. The officer reached out, grabbing Tyrese by the collar and slamming him against the nearby wall. Tyrese gasped, the air knocked out of his lungs, his body slamming painfully into the rough surface. The officer's grip tightened, pulling him up. "Listen to me, boy," the officer growled, his face inches from Tyrese's. "You're nothing. You're always going to be nothing. And don't you ever forget that." Tyrese's heart pounded in his chest. His mind screamed at him to fight back, to do something. But the officer's grip was too strong, too suffocating. He could feel the rage inside him building, the humiliation of this moment pushing him to the brink. And then, something inside him snapped. With a sudden, unexpected force, Tyrese shoved the officer back, breaking free from his grip. The officer staggered back, surprised by the force of Tyrese's resistance. For a moment, everything was still. Tyrese's breath came in ragged gasps, his hands shaking at his sides. The officer glared at him, eyes narrowed in disbelief. "Don't ever touch me again!" Tyrese spat, his voice low but firm. The officer took a step forward, his expression twisted in anger. But Tyrese wasn't afraid anymore. The words, the hate, no longer had the power to break him. He had learned something in that moment, something he could never unlearn. He didn't have to bow down to this man, to anyone. He didn't have to play their game. The officer stopped, his fists clenching at his sides. For a second, Tyrese thought he was going to swing, to retaliate, but then the officer just laughed. It was a low, bitter laugh that sent a chill down Tyrese's spine. "You think you're tough, huh?" the officer muttered. "You think you can just defy me and get away with it?" Tyrese didn't flinch. He didn't back down. "I don't have to get away with anything," he said, his voice steady. "You're the one who's going to regret this." The officer stared at him for a long moment, his face contorting with rage. But then, something in his eyes shifted. Something uncertain flickered in the officer's gaze. Without another word, The officer turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the alley. Tyrese stood there for a long time, his body shaking with adrenaline, his heart still pounding in his chest. He had done it. He had stood up to him. And for the first time in a long while, Tyrese felt something he hadn't felt in years. Control. Power. He wasn't going to let them break him. Not now. Not ever. The world was still a brutal place, filled with hate and violence, but Tyrese was done being afraid. He was done being nothing. Now, he was going to make them fear him. The days following the confrontation with the officer were quiet, but Tyrese could feel the tension in the air, like a storm waiting to break. There were whispers, rumors in the streets, and he could feel the way people looked at him when he walked by. Some of the older folks who had known him as a kid gave him nods of approval, their eyes filled with a mixture of pride and fear. They knew what the streets were like. They had seen it all before. But it wasn't their approval that mattered to Tyrese. It wasn't the approval of people who had been broken by the system, who had lived their lives bending and contorting to make it through. No, what mattered now was power, the power to stand on his own, to make sure no one could ever knock him down again. He had learned that lesson the hard way. The night of the altercation with the officer, the moment he had shoved the man back and walked away with his head held high, had burned itself into Tyrese's mind. It had been a moment of clarity, the first time he had felt like he was truly in control of his life. But there was still so much more to learn. He had to understand the rules of the game, how to make people fear him, how to use the very system that had oppressed him to rise above it. One afternoon, Tyrese was sitting in his room, staring out the window, his thoughts drifting. He had spent days trying to figure out what his next move would be, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. But no matter how hard he tried, one thing kept sticking out to him. His godfather, Governor Montgomery, the man who had shown him what power was, the man who had promised him that no one could touch him as long as he had the right connections. But now, Tyrese wasn't so sure. Montgomery had taught him the value of power, but had he taught him how to use it for the right reasons? Or had he shown him only the path to becoming another cog in the very machine that had destroyed so many others? Tyrese knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to become just another pawn. He wasn't going to become another man who walked the streets of this city, his head down, doing whatever the powerful told him to do. He was going to rise above it. He was going to take control of his life and show them all that he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. As he sat there, deep in thought, his phone buzzed on the desk. Tyrese picked it up, his fingers hovering over the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. Meet me. 10 p.m. The old warehouse on 5th Street. Don't bring anyone. It was a short message, cryptic, but Tyrese recognized the tone. Someone who knew how to play the game. Someone who wasn't afraid to use fear and power to get what they wanted. He didn't hesitate. He knew this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. This was his chance to learn, to understand what the next step was. If there was one thing Tyrese had learned from his godfather, it was that you never passed up an opportunity to gain power. The night came, and Tyrese walked through the quiet streets, his heart racing. He wasn't afraid, not anymore. But the sense of unease still gnawed at him, like a shadow creeping just behind him. The city had its eyes on him now, and he could feel the weight of its judgment every time he stepped out the door. People watched him, waiting for him to fail, waiting for him to slip up. But Tyrese wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. He reached the old warehouse on 5th Street, just as the clock struck 10. The building was abandoned, the windows boarded up, and the air was thick with the scent of rust and decay. Tyrese hesitated for just a moment, then pushed open the heavy metal door and stepped inside. The warehouse was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the floor like dark claws. In the far corner, he saw a figure standing, their back turned to him. Tyrese didn't need to ask who it was. He could feel the power radiating off the man, the same way he had felt it when he first met Montgomery. This was someone who knew the rules of the game, someone who played the game to win. The man turned, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered figure with a chiseled jaw and piercing eyes. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, the kind of suit that screamed authority, that made people take notice. But it wasn't just the suit that made Tyrese's blood run cold. It was the way the man looked at him, like he was nothing more than a piece of meat, a pawn to be used. "Tyrese," the man said, his voice low and smooth, like the sound of a knife slicing through the air. "I've been keeping an eye on you." Tyrese didn't flinch. He wasn't intimidated. Not anymore. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady. The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had seen everything this world had to offer and had used it to their advantage. "My name is Vincent. I'm someone who can teach you how to use your Godfather's power. I'm someone who can show you how to get what you want in this city, if you're willing to learn." Tyrese narrowed his eyes. "And what's the catch?" Vincent's smile grew wider. "No catch, just this. If you want to play the game, you have to play it my way. You have to be willing to do whatever it takes. And trust me, there are no limits in this game, no boundaries, no morals, only power. If you want to survive in this world, you'll have to learn that, because if you don't, you'll be just another casualty, another black kid thrown to the wolves." Tyrese's jaw tightened. He had heard these words before, but they had never felt so real. This was the reality of the world he was living in, a world where power was the only thing that mattered. And if you didn't have it, you were nothing. "You think you can teach me how to survive?" Tyrese asked, his voice sharp. Vincent nodded slowly. "I don't just teach survival. I teach you how to dominate, how to make them beg for your mercy, how to make them fear you. You're not some helpless kid anymore, Tyrese. You're not just another black boy on the streets. You're someone who can take control. You just have to be willing to do what it takes." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Tyrese could feel his blood boiling, the fire inside him growing hotter. He knew what Vincent was saying was true. He had seen it in the way the officers treated him, in the way the world looked at him like he was less than nothing. But Tyrese wasn't going to let them win. He wasn't going to let them break him. "So, what's the first lesson?" Tyrese asked, his voice steady. Vincent stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Tyrese's. "The first lesson is simple," he said. "You have to make them hate you. You have to make them feel your power. You have to make them see that you're not someone they can ignore, that you're someone who can ruin their lives if they don't bow to you." Tyrese's heart raced. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment he stepped into the darkness, into the world of power and control. It was a world where people like him didn't survive unless they learned how to use the very thing that had oppressed them. Racism, hatred, cruelty. It was all part of the game, and if he wanted to win, he had to learn how to play it. "I'm ready," Tyrese said, his voice cold, his eyes locked on Vincent's. Vincent smiled, a dark, predatory smile. "Good, because the moment you step into this world, there's no turning back. You'll have to make sacrifices, Tyrese. You'll have to become something you never thought you'd be. But in the end, it'll all be worth it. Because in this world, if you're not feared, you're nothing." And in that moment, Tyrese knew. This was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where he would learn to use the system that had always oppressed him to his advantage. A chapter where he would make them all fear him. ChatGPT Skazal. Tyrese spent the following weeks immersed in the lessons Vincent taught him. The things Vincent showed him weren't just about surviving the streets anymore. They were about controlling them, bending them to his will. Every conversation, every moment, became an opportunity to learn the rules of this new, darker world. A world that only existed for those who were willing to step on others to climb higher. At first, Tyrese had resisted. He had always believed that he could change the world with kindness, with courage, with respect. But Vincent, with his sharp eyes and razor-sharp tongue, quickly shattered that illusion. He taught Tyrese that respect didn't come from doing good. It came from making people fear you, making them understand that if they stepped out of line, there would be consequences. There was no room for weakness, no place for hesitation. Every time Vincent spoke to him, his words sunk in deeper, like a needle puncturing his skin, filling him with a poisonous knowledge that made him feel both more powerful and more dangerous. It wasn't just the lessons he was learning from Vincent that changed him. It was the way the world treated him now. The officers who had once looked at him with disdain now regarded him with a mixture of fear and hesitation. People on the streets started to whisper when they saw him pass, their eyes flicking toward him, always aware of his presence. He had become someone they noticed, someone who commanded attention without saying a word. And that, Tyrese realized, was the true power. But the lessons Vincent taught were not without cost. Every move Tyrese made, every step forward, seemed to drag him deeper into the muck of the world he had once hoped to avoid. He saw firsthand the way people were crushed beneath the system, the way people like him, people who looked like him, were nothing more than tools to be used. He had learned the hard truth that the world didn't care about his struggles, didn't care about his pain. It only cared about what he could provide, how he could fit into the machine. The black skin that Tyrese wore didn't give him a place in this world. It marked him as less, as something that could be trampled on without consequence. One night, Vincent called Tyrese into his office, a dimly lit space at the edge of town. It was a place that smelled of cigar smoke and old money, a place that reeked of power and manipulation. Tyrese walked into the room, his hands sweaty and his heart thumping in his chest. He wasn't sure why Vincent had called him here tonight, but he knew that it was going to be another test, another moment where the world would either break him or make him stronger. Vincent was standing by the window, looking out over the city, his silhouette a dark outline against the faint glow of the streetlights below. He didn't turn when Tyrese entered the room. He didn't need to. Vincent always commanded attention, whether he was looking at you or not. "I've been keeping an eye on you, Tyrese," Vincent said, his voice low and measured. "You're learning, you're adapting, but there's one thing you still don't understand." Tyrese stood still, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. He could feel Vincent's eyes on him, even though the man wasn't looking directly at him. He had a way of seeing everything in the room without even turning his head. It was like he was always 2 steps ahead, always calculating. "What's that?" Tyrese asked, his voice tight with the pressure of the moment. Vincent turned, finally meeting Tyrese's gaze. His eyes were cold, calculating. "You still don't understand that power isn't just about being feared. It's about breaking people. It's about making them feel so small, so insignificant, that they'll do anything to stay out of your way." Tyrese's stomach tightened. He had seen the way Vincent operated, had seen how he broke people down, how he used them and discarded them like trash. He had seen it in the way people were forced to grovel at his feet, to beg for mercy that was never given. He had seen the look in their eyes, the helplessness, the fear, and for the first time, Tyrese felt that cold, sickening feeling deep in his gut, the realization that this was what he was becoming. "I'm teaching you, Tyrese, how to make people feel that fear, how to make them understand that you're not someone they can mess with," Vincent continued, his voice laced with contempt. "But to do that, you have to go all the way. You can't hesitate. You can't show any weakness." Tyrese swallowed hard, trying to push down the rising panic that threatened to consume him. "I'm not weak," he said, his voice shaky but defiant. Vincent smirked, a cruel glint in his eyes. "No, you're not. But you still haven't learned the final lesson, the one that will make you untouchable." Tyrese's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for Vincent to continue. He had come this far, but the path ahead of him seemed darker, more dangerous than ever. "The final lesson is simple," Vincent said, his voice growing colder. "You have to break someone. You have to make someone like you feel small, make them feel like they don't matter, until they'll do anything to survive. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter where they come from. You have to make them feel the weight of your power. That's how you win. That's how you take control of this city." Tyrese's breath caught in his throat. He had seen the way Vincent worked, the way he crushed people underfoot, the way he used them to climb higher, to achieve more. But this was different. This wasn't about using someone for gain. This was about destroying them, making them nothing. And Tyrese could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He'd spent his life watching people who looked like him get crushed, humiliated, and discarded. He'd seen the way they were treated by the system, the way they were treated by people like Montgomery, like Vincent. They were nothing, just another obstacle to be overcome. And now, Tyrese was being asked to do the same thing. But he had a choice. He could walk away. He could turn his back on everything Vincent had shown him. He could try to live a life outside the system, A life where he wasn't bound by fear and hatred, or he could embrace it. He could embrace the power. He could take control of his life and make sure that no one ever looked at him like he was less than human again. Tyrese took a deep breath, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what he was about to do, but one thing was clear. The moment he stepped into this world, there was no turning back. He would either become everything Vincent had shown him, or he would become just another casualty of the system. And Tyrese knew, deep down, that he wasn't ready to be a casualty. Not yet. So, who do I break? Tyrese asked, his voice cold and steady. Vincent's smile stretched across his face, the look in his eyes darkening. There's a man who's been causing problems, someone who thinks he can stand against us, someone who needs to be taught a lesson. His name is Marcus Lowe. He's a businessman in this city, ruthless, just like us. But he's starting to think he's untouchable. He's starting to think he can play the game without following the rules. Tyrese nodded, his blood boiling at the thought of Marcus Lowe. The man had crossed the line, and now it was time for him to pay. You'll do whatever it takes to break him, Vincent said, his voice low and lethal. You'll make him understand that no one is untouchable, not even him. Tyrese felt the cold weight of the decision settle in his chest. He wasn't just going to break Marcus Lowe. He was going to make him feel what Tyrese had felt all his life. The humiliation, the anger, the crushing weight of a system that saw people like him as nothing. And when he was done, Marcus Lowe would understand that Tyrese was no longer the boy who had been pushed around. He was a man who had learned how to play the game and play it well. This was his moment. This was his chance to rise above it all, to take control, to make them all see that he was someone who could never be broken, and nothing would ever make him go back to being weak again. As the days stretched into weeks, Tyrese's life had begun to resemble something he hadn't imagined possible. The lessons from Vincent had shaped him into something different, something cold, something far removed from the boy who had once believed in kindness, in fairness, in fighting for what was right. Now, he was learning how to thrive in a world where those ideals didn't matter. Power was everything, and as Vincent's teachings became increasingly ingrained in him, Tyrese found himself becoming someone unrecognizable to the kid he used to be. Vincent had given him the tools, but it was up to Tyrese to use them, and use them well. As he walked the streets of the city, he no longer felt like the vulnerable target he once had. Instead, he felt the eyes of others on him, eyes that used to judge, to scorn, to see him as nothing more than a product of his circumstances. Now those same eyes were filled with fear and respect. They knew who he was now. They knew what he was becoming. The job Vincent had given him wasn't something to take lightly. The target was Marcus Lowe, a businessman who, as Vincent had explained, had started stepping out of line. He had been making moves that threatened Vincent's influence in the city, using his wealth and power to push back against the established hierarchy. Lowe didn't realize it, but he had made the mistake of thinking he was untouchable, of thinking he could challenge those in power without consequences. Vincent had made it clear. Lowe had to be broken. Tyrese's task wasn't simply to intimidate Lowe, it was to break him so thoroughly that the rest of the city would understand that no one, not even the wealthy, the powerful, or the untouchable, was safe. They all needed to see that the game had rules, and the most important rule was that power always wins. And now, Tyrese would be the one to prove that. It was a rainy Thursday night when Tyrese's chance arrived. Vincent had set up a meeting at one of Lowe's upscale business properties, an old but impressive building nestled in the heart of the city. Tyrese knew it wasn't just a meeting, it was a trap, and he was the one being sent to close it. He'd spent days preparing for this moment, learning Lowe's routine, studying his weaknesses, his habits, and finding the perfect opportunity to strike. But it wasn't just about what Lowe had built, it was about tearing it all down in one single blow. Tyrese was dressed in a dark, tailored suit, a far cry from the street clothes he had once worn. The change in appearance was part of the transformation he had undergone. His outward demeanor now matched the man he had become. He wasn't some kid who could be pushed around. He wasn't a target. He was someone who would make the rules, someone who would break anyone who stood in his way. The moment he stepped into the building's lobby, he felt the eyes of the people inside on him. There was something powerful about walking into a room, knowing that everyone was watching, knowing that their judgment no longer mattered. The receptionist tried to make eye contact, but Tyrese didn't look at her. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to make his mark. He moved through the lobby, heading toward the elevator, ignoring the whispers behind his back. People like Lowe were used to the respect they demanded, but Tyrese could see the fear lurking in their eyes. They might not say it aloud, but he knew they felt it. They could sense that he wasn't someone to be underestimated. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Tyrese stepped inside, his reflection staring back at him in the polished steel. He didn't recognize himself. This was a man who had been molded by the lessons of the world, lessons of power, of domination, and of cruelty. Tyrese had learned the game. But what Vincent hadn't prepared him for was just how much it would change him. The elevator doors opened on the top floor. Tyrese stepped out into the hallway, his footsteps echoing against the marble floors. This was where Marcus Lowe's empire was built, where his fortune had been made. But tonight, Tyrese was going to tear it all down. He didn't have to wait long. Lowe was there, standing in his office, staring out the window, looking every bit the image of the powerful businessman he thought himself to be. He turned when he heard Tyrese enter, his eyes scanning him briefly before they narrowed with a mixture of annoyance and surprise. "You've got some nerve showing up here," Lowe sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. "What is this? A threat from Vincent?" "I'm not afraid of him, or of you." Tyrese didn't flinch. His gaze remained locked on Lowe, studying him. There was nothing about Lowe's face that betrayed fear. He was a man who had lived his life at the top, who had built his wealth by walking over the backs of people like Tyrese. But what Lowe didn't understand was that his power was about to mean nothing. "You're right about one thing," Tyrese said, his voice calm, controlled. "You're not afraid of Vincent, but you should be afraid of me." Lowe's eyes narrowed further. "What's your game, kid? You come here to threaten me. To what end? Do you think you can break me? Do you really think you're in control?" Tyrese smiled. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating, but it wasn't enough to break him. He stepped forward slowly, his movements deliberate, measured. Every word he spoke was calculated, designed to unsettle Lowe, to make him feel like his empire was crumbling beneath his feet. "You don't understand. You think you can hide behind your money, your power, your status. But you're wrong," Tyrese said, his voice cold. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to destroy you. And you're going to watch it all burn." Lowe scoffed, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You don't scare me. You're just a kid from the streets. What do you know about power? About real power?" Tyrese took another step forward, closing the distance between them. Lowe stood tall, his posture rigid, but there was something in his eyes now. Something that hadn't been there before. Fear. It was faint, but it was there. Tyrese could feel it, and that was all he needed. "I know enough," Tyrese said, his voice quiet now, as if speaking directly to Lowe's deepest fears. "I know that power is not given. It's taken, and it's taken by people like me. People who've been stepped on, pushed around, and told that they'll never be enough. People who learned that the only way to survive is to take what they want. People like me will tear everything you've built apart, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Lowe's face twisted with anger, but Tyrese didn't back down. He could feel the shift in the room, the way Lowe's confidence began to crack. This was no longer a negotiation. This was a battle of wills. "You think you can ruin me?" Lowe spat. "You think you're the one who holds the cards? You have no idea what you're up against." Tyrese reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He held it out in front of Lowe, who took it with a look of confusion. When Lowe unfolded it, his eyes widened in shock. "You've been operating under false pretenses, Marcus," Tyrese said, his voice growing colder with every word. "And now the truth is going to come out. Everything you've hidden, everything you've lied about, it's all here, all of it. Your empire. It's built on lies, corruption, and blood money. And tonight, it all ends. Lowe's hands shook as he looked at the paper, his eyes darting from the document back to Tyrese. The arrogance was gone from his face now, replaced by something far more vulnerable: fear. "You can't do this," Lowe pleaded, his voice cracking. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. You don't know what they'll do to you." Tyrese stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with, and I'm the one who's going to take everything from you. The moment you thought you were untouchable, the moment you thought you could do whatever you wanted without consequences, that's when you sealed your fate." Lowe looked at Tyrese, his eyes filled with desperation. But it was too late. The truth was out, and Tyrese had won. In that moment, Tyrese realized something. He wasn't just playing the game, he was changing it. The system that had once oppressed him, that had tried to crush him underfoot, was now at his mercy, and he wasn't about to let it go. The empire Lowe had built was crumbling before him. But it wasn't just Lowe's empire, it was the entire system that had made men like him think they were untouchable. Tyrese had learned how to use that system, how to manipulate it, how to make it bow to him. And now, it was time to make sure everyone knew that no one was safe. As Lowe's world shattered around him, Tyrese walked out of the office, his head held high, his steps sure. He had taken control. He had won, and nothing was going to stop him now. Tyrese walked away from Marcus Lowe's office with a sense of cold satisfaction. The documents in Lowe's hands had shattered the carefully constructed image he'd built over the years. The man had thought he was untouchable, a figure who could wield his wealth and influence without consequences. But Tyrese knew better. The world had taught him that no one, no matter how high they climbed, was above the system. The rain outside had started to fall heavier, and Tyrese didn't even flinch as it soaked through his suit. He had no time for small distractions like the weather. What mattered was the power he now held in his hands, and what he would do with it. Lowe, once a towering figure in the city, would be brought low. That wasn't just the result of the papers Tyrese had given him. It was a reminder of the ruthless nature of the game that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be played by those who were willing to make the hard choices. Tyrese wasn't sure when he had crossed the line between survival and something darker. Somewhere along the way, the lessons he had learned had transformed him. Where once he had fought for justice, for fairness, now it was about something else: control. The city was full of people like Lowe, people who thought they were too powerful to fall, too rich to be touched. And Tyrese had learned that power wasn't given. It was seized. He couldn't stop thinking about the transformation that had taken place within him. He had become someone else, a different version of himself, a version who now understood the rules of this unforgiving world. Every piece of knowledge Vincent had imparted to him, every lesson about manipulation and power, had carved a new path in his mind. He was no longer a pawn. He was in control. As he stepped into the dimly lit streets, the world seemed quieter. The usual noise of the city, horns honking, people shouting, the usual chaos of urban life, had faded into the background. All Tyrese could hear was the steady beat of his own heart, the pulse of adrenaline that still lingered in his veins. There were no more doubts, no more second thoughts. He had chosen his path, and he was walking it with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. But even as the exhilaration of his victory pulsed through him, there was a gnawing sensation in his chest. Something was still unsettled. The world he had stepped into was full of shadows, full of dangers he hadn't yet fully understood. It wasn't just about breaking people, about taking them down a peg. It was about knowing who to trust and who to destroy. Every person in the system was a tool, a piece to be moved. Tyrese had learned that lesson well from Vincent. But Vincent, with all his power and control, was still a part of the same system, a system built on fear, manipulation, and ruthlessness. And Tyrese had learned how to play the game, but he also realized how fragile it all was. As he walked down the street, his thoughts drifted to the people who had been a part of his life, the people he had once trusted. His godfather, Governor Montgomery, was one of those figures who, despite everything, remained elusive. Tyrese had grown up watching Montgomery's rise, admiring his power from afar. But now, Tyrese wasn't sure where Montgomery fit into his life anymore. The man had shown him the world as it was, but Tyrese couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper, something more sinister beneath the surface of Montgomery's actions. The governor had been a mentor of sorts, guiding him in his pursuit of power. But was that all Montgomery wanted? To use Tyrese as another pawn in his game? Or had Montgomery seen something in him? A fire that could be harnessed, a hunger for control that matched his own? Tyrese wasn't sure. But one thing was certain. Montgomery's influence in his life was far from over. A car pulled up beside him, snapping him out of his thoughts. The driver, a middle-aged man with a tired face, rolled down the window. "Mr. Tyrese," the man said, his voice nervous. "The governor wants to see you. Now." Tyrese didn't hesitate. He had known this moment would come. Montgomery had always been a step ahead, always watching. Tyrese had played his part, taken down low, but now he had to face Montgomery, the man who had shaped him. The game wasn't over yet. The car pulled away from the curb and drove through the rain-soaked streets, the city flashing by in streaks of light. Tyrese's mind raced as he thought about what was to come. The governor's office was high up in one of the tallest buildings in the city, a symbol of the man's wealth and influence. Tyrese had been there before, had seen the polished floors and marble walls, the cold, distant air that hung around Montgomery. But this time, it felt different. This time, he wasn't the same kid who had walked into that office seeking guidance. This time, he was someone who had learned the cost of power. When the car stopped in front of the building, Tyrese stepped out and made his way inside. The elevator ride up felt interminably long, the silence between him and the driver thick with unspoken tension. The doors slid open, and Tyrese walked into the governor's office with a sense of inevitability. Governor Montgomery was sitting behind his desk, his sharp features illuminated by the soft light of a desk lamp. He looked up as Tyrese entered, his expression unreadable. "Tyrese," Montgomery said, his voice as controlled as always, "I've been keeping an eye on you." Tyrese stood in front of the desk, his gaze unwavering. "I've done what you asked. Lowe's finished." Montgomery nodded slowly, as if considering the weight of Tyrese's words. "Yes, you've done well. You've learned how to make people fall in line, how to use their weakness against them. But there's something you still don't understand." Tyrese's pulse quickened. He had learned everything Vincent had taught him, everything that Montgomery had shown him. He had been ruthless, calculating. So, what was it that Montgomery was referring to? Montgomery leaned forward, his eyes sharp and calculating. "You think the game is about breaking people, don't you? You think it's about pushing others down to rise above them. But that's just part of it. Power isn't just about what you can do to others. It's about what you can do to yourself." Tyrese frowned, confusion clouding his thoughts. "What do you mean?" Montgomery's eyes gleamed. "You've been playing this game like a puppet, moving your pieces around, knocking over everyone who stands in your way. But the truth is, power is about control. Control over your emotions, your desires, your weaknesses. You can't be ruled by anger, by revenge. If you're controlled by those things, you're just another pawn in the system. You've done well, Tyrese, but there's more for you to learn." For the first time, Tyrese felt a flicker of doubt in his chest. He had thought he understood the game, that he had everything figured out. But Montgomery was right. He had been driven by his anger, by the need for revenge. He had thought that power came from breaking others, from making them bend to his will. But if power was truly about control, about mastering himself, then he had much more to learn. Montgomery's words lingered in the air, heavy with their implications. Tyrese wasn't just learning how to take control of the city. He was learning how to control himself, to become something more than just another pawn. But what did that mean for him? What was his next move? Montgomery's voice cut through his thoughts. "You've proven yourself, Tyrese. But remember, this is just the beginning. The real power lies in knowing when to move and when to wait, in knowing who to trust and when to strike. The game is bigger than you think." Tyrese nodded slowly, feeling the weight of Montgomery's words settle over him. There was still so much to learn, so much more to master. But now, for the first time, he wasn't just playing the game, he was starting to understand it. The pieces were in motion, and Tyrese knew that no one would see him coming. Tyrese stood at the window of Montgomery's office, looking out over the city. The skyline glittered under the fading sun, the streets bustling below, full of people living their lives in the shadows of power. For a moment, he felt a disconnect, a strange sense of detachment from the world he had once known. He had become a part of something bigger, something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. But now, he was in control. The lessons were over, and the pieces had been set. Tyrese had done everything that had been asked of him, and more. He had torn down low, watched as his empire crumbled, seen the fear in the eyes of those who had once ruled the city. But that wasn't enough. He wasn't content with just taking down a single target. His mind was on something far greater now. The system. The people who had built the city on their own terms, who had crushed the lives of others without a second thought. It was time for Tyrese to take his place among them. But not as a follower, as the leader. The doors to the office opened behind him, and he didn't have to turn to know who it was. Governor Montgomery walked into the room, his steps measured, his presence commanding as always. He wasn't smiling. His face was as cold as ever. But there was something else in his eyes now, something almost approving. "You've done well," Montgomery said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "You've proven yourself." Tyrese didn't respond immediately. He still couldn't shake the feeling that Montgomery was testing him, watching him. After everything Tyrese had done, everything he had learned, he still felt like a pawn in a game much bigger than himself. But now, he knew he was no longer a pawn. He was something else, something far more dangerous. "I've done more than prove myself," Tyrese said finally, his voice steady. "I've learned how to win." Montgomery's eyes glinted with something like respect, but his face remained stoic. "The game isn't about winning, Tyrese. It's about understanding when to strike and when to wait. It's about knowing who to trust, who to break, and who to keep close. You've done well, but there's one thing you still need to learn." Tyrese turned to face him, his heart racing, as though he were standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. "And what's that?" he asked. Montgomery stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "The real test isn't how well you can break others. It's how well you can hold on to your power once you have it. The world is full of people who want to take everything from you. They'll come for you, and you have to be ready to stop them, to do whatever it takes to keep your place." For the first time, Tyrese felt the weight of Montgomery's words. He had thought power was about breaking people, about making them bow to you, but Montgomery was right. It wasn't just about destroying others. It was about maintaining control when the world tried to take it away from you. The fight didn't stop with Lowe. It never stopped. "I'm ready," Tyrese said, his voice growing stronger, more certain with every word. "I know what I have to do, and I'm going to do it." Montgomery gave him a small nod. "Good, but remember, Tyrese, power isn't something you hold lightly. It's something you protect with everything you have. And the people you think you can trust, they'll betray you when it suits them." Tyrese's thoughts flickered to Vincent, to all the lessons he had been taught about using people as tools. He had seen the manipulation, the cruelty that came with climbing to the top, and he had also seen the fear in the eyes of those who had once thought they were untouchable. But as Montgomery had said, there was still so much more to learn, so much more to do. "You've learned how to break others, Tyrese," Montgomery continued, his voice like steel. "But now you must learn how to be the one who stands unbroken. If you want to rule this city, you'll have to be willing to sacrifice, to push those who stand by you just as hard as you push those who stand against you." Tyrese's mind raced. He had seen the way the system worked, the way those in power used people, discarded them, molded them like clay to fit their needs. He had learned how to make others fear him, but now he needed to learn how to make them follow him. The sound of footsteps outside interrupted his thoughts. Montgomery didn't flinch. He simply walked to his desk and sat down, his hands folding neatly in front of him. "It's time to make the final move," Montgomery said, his eyes narrowing slightly. Low was just the beginning. There are others who need to be taken down, others who think they control this city, but in reality, they're just as weak as the rest. Tyrese took a deep breath, his heart thudding in his chest. "Who's next?" Montgomery looked up at him, his eyes like knives. "I'm sure you know who they are, the old guard. The people who hold the reins behind the scenes, the ones who've been running things for years. They won't let you rise without a fight, but there'll be no match for you. Not now." Tyrese's pulse quickened. The game had never been about one person. It was about reshaping the entire system, pulling down the pillars that held it up, one by one. Low was just a piece of the puzzle. Now, it was time for the rest to fall. He knew what Montgomery was asking him to do. It wasn't just about taking power. It was about destroying the very foundations of the system that had kept people like him in their place. The rich, the powerful, the untouchables. They had built their empire on the backs of people like Tyrese. And now, it was time to tear it all down. As Tyrese turned to leave Montgomery's office, the weight of everything that had happened, everything he had done, pressed down on him like 1,000 pounds. He had walked away from the streets, away from the boy he had once been. He had learned to break people, to bend them to his will, to make them fear him. But now, he realized, it wasn't just about breaking others, it was about creating something new. Tyrese was no longer a kid from the streets. He was no longer the one being broken by the system. He was the one who was breaking it, and nothing would stop him from reshaping the world in his image. The doors to the office closed behind him, and for the first time, Tyrese didn't look back. The city would never be the same again. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. What did you think about the journey of Tyrese and the world he navigated? Have you experienced anything similar in your own life, especially with issues like racism or power dynamics? Your insights and experiences mean a lot to us, and we deeply value each and every one of you who engages with these stories. If you enjoyed this chapter, please consider subscribing and liking this story to stay updated on future content. Your support truly helps us grow and continue creating. We also encourage you to leave a comment with a phrase or reflection on the themes from the story, so we can see who's been listening until the very end. Thank you for being with us, and we hope you have a great day ahead.